They told you that feeling everything makes you human. They told you that showing your emotions makes you strong. They lied to you because right now, somewhere out there, someone is watching you bleed and using that blood as their advantage. Your pain is their intelligence report. Your anger is their tactical map. Your love is their weapon. Niccolò Machiavelli didn't just write about politics. He wrote the operating system for power. And the first rule of that system is brutal, simple, and almost no one is willing to accept it. If you feel nothing, you can do anything. Stay right here, because what I'm about to show you will permanently rewire how you see emotion, control, and dominance. Let me ask you something honest. How many times has an emotion cost you? How many times did rage make you say something that destroyed a relationship? How many times did fear stop you from taking a step that could have changed your life? How many times did love, real, raw, desperate love, make you weak in front of someone who didn't deserve your strength? Every single one of those moments had a name, and that name is emotional detachment, or rather, the complete and devastating lack of it. Today, we go into the philosophy of Machiavelli, not the distorted, cartoonish version you were taught in school, but the real, surgical, ruthless doctrine of psychological fortitude that has been studied by generals, leaders, and the most dangerous minds in history. This is not about becoming cold. This is not about becoming a machine. This is about becoming untouchable. By the end of this video, you will understand why the most powerful people in the world don't react. They calculate. You will understand the 7 laws of emotional detachment that Machiavelli embedded in his writings, and you will walk away with a completely redesigned relationship to your own mind. Let's begin. Emotion is the first battlefield, and most people surrender it before the fight even starts. Here is a truth that most self-help gurus are too afraid to say aloud. Your emotions are not your identity. They are signals. They are noise. And like any noise, if you don't learn to tune it out, it will deafen you. Machiavelli opens The Prince with a devastating observation. Men are driven by 2 engines, fear and desire. Strip away the philosophy, the poetry, the illusions, and at the core of every human action is either the fear of losing something or the desire to gain something. Now, here's where it becomes dangerous. When you are inside that fear or desire, when you are consumed by it, you lose clarity. You cannot see the board. You cannot anticipate moves. You react instead of respond. You feel instead of think. And in that moment, you are not a player. You are a piece being moved. This is the central crisis of the modern individual. Emotional detachment has been misunderstood, even discouraged. We are told to constantly process, to remain open, to display vulnerability as strength. We are surrounded by a culture that often rewards emotional exposure without teaching emotional control. But from a strategic perspective, that creates predictability, and predictability can be used. The real conflict is internal, between your instinctive emotional responses and your deliberate, strategic thinking. Every external challenge you face reflects this internal dynamic. The moment you develop true psychological fortitude, the ability to observe emotions without immediately acting on them, your decisions begin to change. Your interactions change. The way people interpret your behavior changes. But here's what most people misunderstand. It's not that effective individuals don't feel. They often feel deeply. The difference is they have built a system that allows them to process emotion without being controlled by it. Stay with me, because next, we break down exactly how that system is built and how you can apply it. Core point: Machiavelli's most misunderstood teaching is not cruelty, it's performance. Machiavelli wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." Read that again, slowly. He is not talking about deception in the cheap, petty sense. He is talking about the profound difference between appearance and reality, and how mastery of that gap is the ultimate form of power. When you practice emotional detachment, you are not suppressing your emotions. You are choosing, consciously, deliberately, which emotions to display and which to process privately. You are becoming the director of your own performance. Think about the most intimidating, commanding people you've ever encountered. Not the ones who were loudest or most aggressive, but the ones who made you feel like they were operating on a frequency you couldn't tune into, the ones whose stillness felt like a threat. That stillness. That is psychological fortitude made visible. In negotiations, the first person to show emotional investment loses. In confrontations, the first person to raise their voice has already signaled weakness. In seduction, whether romantic or social, the person who cares less has all the power. This is where everything changes. Most people treat emotion as something that happens to them, a wave that hits, a storm they survive. Machiavelli's teaching, the deeper, darker, more liberating teaching, is that you can learn to become the weather. You decide what front is moving in. You decide what temperature the room runs at. The mask isn't a lie. The mask is a shield, and behind every great shield is a warrior who hasn't yet been wounded. This next part is critical, because now we get into the actual mechanics, the specific trainable practices of emotional detachment that you can begin applying today. Core point. Non-reaction is not passivity. It is the most active, disciplined, and devastating tool in the strategic arsenal. Let me give you a scenario. Someone insults you, publicly, in front of people whose opinion matters to you. Option 1. You react. You defend yourself. You explain, justify, get angry, or crumble. In doing so, you give them exactly what they wanted. You confirm to everyone watching that they had the power to move you. Option 2. You look at them. You say nothing. You allow the silence to compress the air in the room until they become uncomfortable in it. Option 2 is not weakness. Option 2 is the Machiavellian response, and it is terrifying to be on the receiving end of it. The discipline of non-reaction is built on a fundamental principle of psychological fortitude. You cannot control what happens to you. You can only control the gap between stimulus and response. In that gap, that half second, that breath, that pause, lives your entire character. Machiavelli watched princes crumble, not because their enemies were stronger, but because their enemies knew which emotional buttons to press. Every tantrum in a negotiation is a concession. Every visible fear is an invitation to be preyed upon. Every display of desperate need is a signal that you can be controlled. But here's what most people never realize. Non-reaction doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you have a processing system that is faster than your emotional reflex. You feel the anger, and before it reaches your face, your hands, your voice, it passes through a filter. That filter is built by emotional detachment, and it is built through practice, not personality. Here is how you begin training it. First, observe your emotional triggers, without judgment, for 2 weeks. Keep a private record. When did you react? What was the stimulus? What was the cost? You cannot fortify a wall you haven't mapped. Second, practice the pause. Before every significant response, especially in conflict, insert a deliberate 3-second delay. It sounds small. It is enormous. Third, rehearse the cold response. When your body wants to escalate, train yourself to de-escalate vocally while remaining internally unmoved. Your voice should descend in volume and pace as tension rises around you. This is not coldness. This is architecture. And this is exactly what Machiavelli meant when he described the ideal prince as someone who could choose his nature rather than be enslaved to it. Core point: most people are carrying a mountain of emotional debt, and it is bankrupting them silently. Emotional debt is the accumulation of unresolved feeling that you owe to past experiences, old humiliations, old wounds, old losses that never got processed. And here is the brutal truth, that debt accrues interest. Every time you walk into a new situation carrying the weight of an old betrayal, you are not responding to reality. You are responding to your memory of a wound. You are fighting a war that ended years ago while losing the battle that is happening right now. Machiavelli had a ruthless clarity about the past. He didn't romanticize it. He didn't wallow in it. He studied it, extracted what was useful, and moved forward with surgical precision. That is the Machiavellian approach to emotional debt. Emotional detachment from the narrative and full engagement with the lesson. This is where everything changes, because most people do the exact opposite. They become attached to their pain. They build identities around their trauma. They narrate their struggles so often that the struggle becomes the story. and the story becomes the prison. The person who was cheated on can't commit again. The person who was humiliated can't speak in public. The person who failed in business can't take another risk. This is emotional debt, and it compounds daily. True psychological fortitude demands a different relationship with suffering, not the suppression of it, but the decoupling of your identity from it. You experienced pain, you are not made of it. The way you begin to cut this debt is through what I call strategic grief, giving yourself a defined, limited time to fully feel the weight of something, and then deliberately, consciously, choosing to set it down, not forget it, not pretend it didn't happen, but refuse to allow it to have a vote in your present decisions. This is the discipline Machiavelli lived. He was imprisoned, he was tortured, he was exiled from the city he loved, and he sat down and wrote the most powerful manual on political philosophy in human history. That is what happens when you cut your emotional debt instead of paying interest on it forever. Stay with me. The next section is where we build the actual fortress. Core point. Psychological fortitude is not a personality trait. It is a constructed environment. Let's be exact about what we mean when we talk about psychological fortitude. It is not toughness. Toughness implies you are being hit and you are enduring. That is still a passive state. You are still the target, still absorbing impact. True psychological fortitude is architectural. It means you have built a mind in which most of the things that damage ordinary people simply have no purchase. They arrive and they slide off. Machiavelli described the ideal mind as one that had mastered what he called virtù, not virtue in the moral sense, but in the original Latin sense of virtù, power, capacity, excellence, the force of will that bends fortune rather than being broken by it. But here's what most people never realize about this concept. Virtù is not something you have. It is something you build deliberately, through repeated acts of choosing the difficult thing over the comfortable thing, through repeatedly choosing response over reaction, through training yourself to feel nothing in the moments when feeling something would cost you everything. Here is how the fortress is constructed. Pillar 1. Solitude. You must have a private inner world that no one can access, not hidden emotions, but an internal command center that you never expose. Machiavelli advises the prince to keep his counsel closely guarded. The same applies to your inner life. Not everything needs to be shared. Not every wound needs to be witnessed. Pillar 2. Long-term thinking. Emotional people are dominated by the immediate, the insult that just happened, the rejection that just landed, the fear that just arrived. The fortress mind always has one eye on the longer arc, and that perspective makes most immediate emotional triggers utterly irrelevant. Pillar 3. Controlled exposure. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive. To build emotional detachment, you must deliberately expose yourself to discomfort rather than avoid it. Difficult conversations you've been postponing, physical challenges you've been softening, silence you've been filling with noise. Every time you sit with discomfort and do not flinch, you lay another stone in the fortress wall. Pillar 4. Identity anchoring. Know precisely who you are at your most stripped down, pressure-tested core. Because when the world tries to destabilize you, and it will, your anchor is your identity, not your feelings about yourself in that moment, but the deep, pre-committed, decided sense of who you are and what you stand for. That anchor makes panic impossible. This is the fortress, and once you have built it, no one can siege it, because there is nothing to attack. The endgame of emotional detachment is not the elimination of emotion, it is the mastery of its deployment. Here is the final revelation, and it is the one that separates the philosophy of Machiavelli from simple stoicism or emotional numbness. The goal is not to feel nothing always. The goal is to feel nothing when feeling would cost you, and to deploy feeling, consciously, strategically, with devastating precision, when it gives you the advantage. Machiavelli understood this implicitly. He wrote that a prince must know when to be the lion and when to be the fox. The lion feels. The fox calculates. True power is knowing which animal the moment demands. This is where everything changes for people who truly internalize this. When you have developed genuine emotional detachment, when you have built the fortress, you suddenly have access to a resource that most people never discover, the ability to choose to feel, to choose to show warmth, enthusiasm, passion, even vulnerability, not because you've lost control, but because you have assessed that displaying it serves a purpose. The leader who sheds a single, controlled tear at the right moment commands more loyalty than 1,000 speeches. The negotiator who shows precisely calibrated enthusiasm at the right juncture closes deals that logic alone cannot. The person who, having been entirely still and cold for 90% of a conversation, suddenly turns on full presence and warmth, is devastating to encounter. They hold the room completely. This is psychological fortitude at its highest expression, not the absence of emotion, but the absolute authority over it. You are no longer the instrument, you are the musician. This next part, the final section, brings everything together. Don't go anywhere. Core point. These 7 laws, drawn from Machiavelli's writings, are the complete operating manual for emotional detachment and psychological fortitude. Law 1. Never reveal the depth of your care. The moment someone knows how much something means to you, they have leverage over you. Let your actions speak clearly, but keep the intensity of your attachment private. Law 2. Treat every provocation as data. When someone angers you, instead of reacting, study them. What are they trying to trigger? What do they fear you might do if you don't react? Your emotional detachment is intelligence gathering. Law 3. Respect the future more than the present feeling. Before every significant emotional response, ask, will this matter in 5 years? In most cases, the answer is no, and that answer should be sufficient to dissolve the urgency of the feeling. Law 4. Solitude is your sharpening stone. The world will dull you. Regular, deliberate periods of solitude, without stimulation, without distraction, without performance, sharpen your psychological fortitude back to an edge. Law 5. Never fight emotion with emotion. If someone is in a rage, do not meet them there. Drop your register, slow your pace, lower the emotional temperature with your own presence. The person who stays cold always wins against the person who burns hot. Law 6. Accept impermanence without sentimentality. Machiavelli understood that all things, alliances, positions, fortunes, relationships, are temporary by nature. The person who accepts this does not grieve each ending. They prepare for the next beginning before the ending arrives. Law 7. Your standards are your fortress walls. What you will and will not accept from the world, from people, from situations, from yourself, is the architecture of your identity. Every time you compromise a standard under emotional pressure, you crack a wall. Every time you hold the line, you add a stone. Emotional detachment is what makes it possible to hold the line even when everything in you is screaming to surrender. 7 laws, centuries old, and still completely, terrifyingly relevant to the world you are navigating right now. Let me bring you back to the question I opened with. How many times has an emotion cost you? Now ask yourself a different question. What would your life look like if it never cost you again? If every provocation became data, if every wound became wisdom, if every moment of pressure refined you rather than breaking you, if you could step into any room, any negotiation, any confrontation, and feel completely, absolutely, devastatingly at home inside your own stillness. That is what emotional detachment builds. That is what psychological fortitude protects. That is the mindset Machiavelli described across 5 centuries of dust and political upheaval. And it is as surgically relevant today as it was in the courts of 15th century Florence. You are not being asked to stop feeling. You are being asked to stop being governed by feeling. You are being asked to take back the throne inside your own mind. And Machiavelli's final and most lasting message to anyone who wants to wield genuine power over circumstances, over others, and most importantly, over themselves, is this: fortune favors the prepared, and the most prepared person in any room is the one who walks in having already won the war inside themselves. Feel nothing, build everything. If this video reached something in you, if you feel even the faint beginning of a shift, subscribe. Because this channel is built for people who are done being moved by the world and are ready to start moving it. Drop a comment below. What emotion has cost you the most? I read every single one. Until the next one, stay cold, stay strategic, and remember, power is not given, it is constructed, one decision at a time.